Hi y'all, it's me again. I'm going to be continuing reading from my book, The 1900s. Okay, here we go. A period of change and tension. An important part of the 19th century growth in population resulted from immigration. From 1870 to 1900, nearly 12 million persons came to America's shores, mostly from Europe. Such newcomers were continuing to arrive at an average rate of about 100,000 a year, I think. At the same time, a much larger proportion of the American people, native and immigrant alike, was living in urban rather than rural areas. In 1870, there were only 7 cities in the whole broad country that could boast of 200,000 or more inhabitants. In 30 years, this number grew to 19. Changes in the economic life of the country were as great and even more significant than population growth. The last decade or so of the old century marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The frontier, which had moved steadily westward for generations, disappeared. About 1890, industry for the first time became more important than agriculture and also became more dependent on machinery than on skilled labor. It was organized in ever larger units while the trusts and the holding companies began to dominate one field of enterprise after another. By 1900, there were 185 large industrial combinations whose total capitalization of 3 million represented one-third of all the capital in all the nation's manufacturing enterprises. The middle years of the 1890s had been a period of business depression, but conditions began to improve in 1897, and most Americans were optimistic as the new century dawned. This was true in spite of the fact that class and economic distinctions were steadily, and some thought dangerously, increasing. Almost all the wealth of the country was controlled by about 20% of the people. Working men who labored in units of hundreds and thousands no longer had any direct contact with those who owned or controlled the enormous factories. Then, too, more and more of the actual control was exercised by bankers and financiers rather than by industrialists and factory managers. The farmers of the West and South felt themselves going down in both economic and social status. They loudly blamed the bankers and the railroad owners for their troubles, saying that they could borrow money only at exorbitant rates of interest and that the railroads were charging them far too much to transport their products. Certainly the country was entering a period of increased tension among its member groups in both economics and politics. The new century might look enticing, but it brought with it terrifying problems in adjusting to the new urban industrialized world. There was a need to absorb the masses of immigrants, most of whom lived in poverty in the large cities, to bridge the gap between the new gaudy rich and the landless factory hands, to bring up to date the antiquated political machinery so that the continent and its large cities could be governed honestly and efficiently. American Empire. No event of the last years of the old century did more to change the world for Americans than the Spanish-American War in 1898. What started out for many well-meaning people as a struggle to free Cuba and the Cubans from oppressive Spanish rule before World War II ended as a war conquest that presented the United States with a colonial empire. In 10 weeks in the spring and summer, American naval and military strength toppled Spain as a world power. and made for this country a place in the ranks of imperial glory. The peace treaty that followed confirmed the American democracy as ruler of Puerto Rico in the Atlantic and of the Philippine Islands in the Pacific, within native and Spanish cultures and languages. In a separate and peaceful transaction, the Hawaiian Islands were annexed in 1898 and became a territory in 1900. By agreement with Germany and Great Britain, 7 islands in the Samoan group in the Pacific became United States property in 1899. The Puerto Ricans preferred American than Spanish rule, but many Filipinos felt otherwise. Those who had been fighting the Spanish regime expected the United States to give the islands their freedom, as it was doing in Cuba, and they declared their independence in early 1899. The men in authority in Washington did not think the Filipinos were as yet capable of self-government and saw the native government as an insurrection. Before the bloody struggle that followed was ended, American forces in the islands amounted to 74,000 men, and there were unpleasant charges of atrocities on both sides. In 1900, William Howard Taft was sent to the Philippines to establish a civil government, but it was 1902 before the war could be officially ended and a basic law for the islands passed by Congress. Please rate, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you're on TikTok, please like and follow my videos. Okay, bye!